Dr. Tobias Chen had perfected the art of being professionally present while remaining personally invisible. After 15 years studying dead civilizations, he'd become excellent at documentation without engagement, analysis without interaction, contributing valuable work while maintaining comfortable emotional distance. The dead didn't judge your social awkwardness or notice when you missed conversational cues. Ruins didn't care if you were better at ancient languages than modern small talk. Then Queen Liarith arrived at Deep Reach Research Installation, and Tobias's carefully constructed isolation strategy encountered a problem it couldn't solve through avoidance. The Sethran Dominion had granted humanity access to the ancient Sethka ruins scattered across this sector under specific conditions. All findings would be shared, excavation would respect cultural sensitivities, and Queen Liarith herself would oversee the project to ensure proper treatment of her people's ancestral heritage. The Sethran claimed direct descendancy from the Sethka, a civilization that had vanished mysteriously 3 millennia ago, leaving behind architecture that defied contemporary engineering and inscriptions that suggested philosophical sophistication humanity was still trying to comprehend. Tobias had been thrilled about the excavation access, less thrilled about the royal oversight, and completely unprepared for Queen Liarith herself. She arrived with minimal entourage, which surprised everyone who'd been preparing for elaborate ceremony. The queen just walked into the research installation like she belonged there, her silver-white hair flowing past her shoulders in ways that seemed to defy station gravity, those distinctive Sethran ears rising to elegant points, and adorned with ancient symbols that denoted both royal lineage and personal history. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean twilight, blue-violet that shifted depending on light and angle, holding depths that suggested she'd seen more than Tobias could imagine in his brief human lifespan. She was, objectively, the most striking being Tobias had ever seen. She was also intelligent, articulate, genuinely interested in the excavation, and possessed the kind of commanding presence that made rooms feel smaller just by her being in them. Tobias took one look at her during the initial briefing, felt his brain perform several unauthorized reboots, and immediately began constructing strategic avoidance protocols. It wasn't fear, exactly. Queen Liarith was perfectly cordial, her questions about the excavation insightful, her respect for the research apparent. But Tobias found himself hyper-aware of her in ways that had nothing to do with professional collaboration. He noticed how she moved with unconscious grace, how her ears tilted slightly when she was considering new information, how her twilight eyes seemed to actually see him rather than just looking in his general direction. He noticed, and he knew that noticing was dangerous, so he did what he always did when social situations became complicated. He retreated into work and carefully managed his schedule to minimize problematic interactions. The excavation was vast enough that strategic positioning was feasible. When Queen Liarith visited Section 3, Tobias volunteered for analysis duty in Section 7. When she attended morning briefings, he suddenly had urgent cataloging that required his presence in the archives. When direct interaction became unavoidable, he was professionally thorough but emotionally distant, answering her questions with academic precision while revealing absolutely nothing personal. He thought he was being subtle. He was demonstrably wrong about that. The excavation proceeded in layers, literally and figuratively. The ancient Sethka had built in complex strata, chambers within chambers, each level revealing new aspects of their civilization. The outer sections showed public spaces, markets, gathering halls, administrative centers. Deeper sections revealed private areas, residential quarters, spaces for contemplation. The deepest sections, still being carefully excavated, appeared to be ceremonial places where the Sethka had grappled with questions about existence, meaning, connection across differences. Tobias specialized in the inscriptions, the written language the Sethka had left behind. Each symbol carried layers of meaning, context-dependent, requiring both linguistic expertise and cultural understanding to properly translate. Queen Liarith's presence was invaluable here. She could provide Sethran perspective on symbols that had evolved from ancient to modern usage, context that purely human analysis would miss, which meant working with her should have been essential to his research. Instead, Tobias found himself requesting translations through intermediaries, sending questions via official channels, accessing her insights secondhand through reports rather than direct consultation. By week 3, his avoidance had become so elaborate it qualified as architectural achievement. He'd mapped her daily schedule, identified patterns in her site visits, calculated optimal times for his own excavation work that minimized overlap. He'd become a ghost in the installation, present but never quite there when she was looking. His colleagues noticed. Dr. Sarah Vance from the linguistics team mentioned it during their weekly analysis session, her tone carefully neutral in that way that meant she definitely noticed something. "You know, the Queen specifically asked about your theories on the ceremonial texts," Sarah said, reviewing translation notes in the archive. "She wanted to discuss your interpretation of the connection philosophy passages." "I sent a detailed report," Tobias replied, not looking up from his own work. "She wanted to discuss it, in person. She said your written analysis was brilliant, but she had questions about contextual implications." "I'm sure she can work through those questions with the team." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Tobias, are you avoiding Queen Liarith?" "I'm managing my schedule efficiently," he said, which was technically true and completely dishonest. "You're managing your schedule to never be in the same room as her," Sarah corrected, "which is impressive from a logistical standpoint but weird from a professional standpoint. She's the foremost Sethran expert on ancient cultural contexts. You're our lead epigrapher. You should be working together constantly." "We are working together, just asynchronously. That's not how collaboration works, and you know it." Sarah studied him with the kind of analytical focus she usually reserved for fragmentary inscriptions. "She intimidates you. She's a queen who's ruled for 2 centuries. Intimidating is part of the job description. But you work with intimidating people all the time. You presented theories to the Archon Council last year without breaking a sweat. You defended your dissertation in front of the most terrifying academics in 3 sectors. This is different." Sarah leaned forward. "You like her." "I respect her expertise," Tobias said firmly, his face carefully neutral. "No, you like her, and it's making you weird." "I'm always weird. It's my natural state." "Weirder than usual," Sarah clarified. "And before you construct another elaborate deflection, yes, I've noticed. Half the installation has noticed. The only question is whether Queen Liarith has noticed, and given that she spent 200 years reading political situations and managing complex social dynamics, I'm guessing yes." Tobias felt his stomach drop. "She hasn't said anything." "Because she's probably trying to figure out if you're avoiding her because you're uncomfortable around Sethran authority, or because you're human with weird prejudices, or because you're personally bothered by her presence. Eventually, she's going to ask directly, because that's what leaders do when they want answers." Sarah closed her data pad. "Might want to prepare better response than 'I'm managing my schedule efficiently.'" But Tobias didn't prepare a better response. Instead, he doubled down on his avoidance strategy, which was definitely sustainable and wouldn't create any problems whatsoever. He started taking late shifts, working in the ruins after official excavation hours when Queen Liarith would be attending to administrative duties or diplomatic communications. The solitude suited him anyway. He'd always preferred the quiet focus of solo work, the ability to think without social performance demands. Tonight he was in Section 7, the ceremonial chambers, documenting inscriptions by portable light. The symbols here were particularly complex, layered meanings that required careful analysis. He was absorbed in translating a passage about choosing connection across differences when a voice spoke behind him, clear and direct, and absolutely not supposed to be here. Why do you avoid me, Dr. Chen? Tobias jumped so violently, he nearly dropped his scanner. He spun around to find Queen Liareth standing approximately 3 meters away, having somehow entered the chamber with complete silence, despite the fact that the excavation site's floors were covered in debris that should have made quiet approach impossible. She stood in the portable light, her silver-white hair catching the illumination in ways that made it seem luminous, her twilight eyes reflecting the glow in shades of deep purple blue. She was wearing practical excavation clothing rather than formal regalia, but somehow still carried herself with authority that made the ancient chamber feel like her throne room. "Your Majesty," Tobias managed, his voice coming out higher than he'd intended. "I didn't expect. I thought you were in communications with the Dominion Council tonight." "That meeting concluded early," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp with assessment. "Which is fortunate, because it gave me opportunity to address something that's been bothering me for approximately 3 weeks." "I'm not sure what you mean." The lie was automatic and unconvincing even to his own ears. "Don't." The single word carried enough authority to make him stop. "I've spent 200 years navigating political deception, reading subtext, managing people who carefully craft their presentations to achieve specific outcomes. I'm exceptionally good at identifying when someone is being dishonest with me. So please don't insult either of our intelligence by pretending you don't know what I mean." Tobias stood frozen, his back literally against an ancient wall, nowhere to retreat. "You've been avoiding me," Queen Liareth continued, stepping closer with that predator grace the Sethran seemed to possess naturally. Systematically, carefully, with impressive logistical planning. You schedule your excavation work to coincide with my off-site meetings. You volunteer for assignments in sections I'm not visiting. You send questions through intermediaries instead of asking directly. When direct interaction becomes unavoidable, you're professionally thorough but personally absent, answering questions while revealing nothing of yourself. She was close now, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns etched into her ear adornments, close enough to notice that her twilight eyes weren't uniform color, but rather contained flecks of lighter blue, like stars scattered across evening sky. "At first I assumed it was standard nervousness around authority," she said, her voice softer now but no less direct. "Then I considered possible species prejudice, humans uncomfortable around Sethran power and longevity. But you work well with other Sethran researchers. You collaborate easily with my cultural advisors. The avoidance is specific, targeted, personal." She tilted her head slightly, ears shifting position in what Tobias had learned was Sethran body language for focused curiosity. "So I'm asking you directly, Dr. Chen, why do you avoid me? What have I done to earn such deliberate distance?" The silence in the ancient chamber was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of portable lights and Tobias's entirely too loud heartbeat. Queen Liareth waited, patient in the way that beings with centuries of lifespan could be, her twilight eyes holding his with expectation that he'd answer honestly. Tobias could lie. Should lie, probably. Construct some professional explanation about workflow efficiency or research methodology, or literally anything that wasn't the mortifying truth. His brain helpfully offered several plausible deflections, each more elaborate than the last. Instead, surrounded by ruins that had stood for 3 millennia, facing a woman who'd explicitly asked him to stop being dishonest, he found himself incapable of adding more deception to a chamber that had witnessed enough of civilization's failures already. "You haven't done anything wrong," he said finally, his voice rough. "You've been nothing but supportive of the excavation. Your insights have been invaluable. Your questions are always thoughtful. Your respect for the research process is obvious. The avoidance isn't about you doing something wrong." "Then what is it about?" she asked, still patient but with an edge now that suggested her patience had limits. "It's about me being uncomfortable with how I react when you're around," Tobias admitted, the words coming out in a rush before his self-preservation instincts could stop them. "You're distracting in ways that aren't professional. I notice things I shouldn't notice. I think about conversations we've had when I should be focusing on work. You make rooms feel different just by being in them. And I don't know how to be around you without being obvious about all of that. So I've been avoiding the situation entirely, rather than making you uncomfortable with attention you didn't ask for." The silence that followed was somehow even more complete than before. Tobias watched emotions cycle across Queen Liarith's face: surprise, confusion, something that might have been pleasure quickly suppressed, uncertainty. Her ears had shifted position into angles he couldn't interpret, probably because Sethran body language didn't have a category for Queen processes unexpected confession from awkward human archaeologist. "You avoid me," she said slowly, testing each word like she was translating from a language she just learned, "because you're attracted to me. Not because I've intimidated you or offended you or done something inappropriate. Because you find me distracting." "Yes," Tobias confirmed, his face burning with embarrassment that had probably elevated his core temperature to medically concerning levels. "And I know that's completely inappropriate given your position and mine, given the professional context, given literally everything about this situation. Which is why I've been trying to maintain distance rather than subject you to attention you didn't ask for, and probably don't want from someone who's basically a socially incompetent human researcher, who's better at dead languages than living conversation." Queen Liarith stared at him, her twilight eyes wide, her mouth slightly open in genuine shock. Her hands, usually so controlled and purposeful in their gestures, had frozen mid-movement. The portable lights cast shadows across her face that made her expression even harder to read. And Tobias wished desperately that the ancient Sethka had built convenient escape routes into their ceremonial chambers. "In 200 years," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you know how many people have avoided me because they found me attractive?" She didn't wait for him to answer, which was good because Tobias had no idea what to say to that. "None," Queen Liarith continued, her voice gaining strength but losing its usual commanding tone, becoming something more personal, more vulnerable. "Zero. Not once in 2 centuries has anyone avoided me because they were attracted to me and didn't want to make me uncomfortable with unwanted attention." She stepped closer, and Tobias would have retreated, except there was an ancient wall behind him that had survived 3,000 years and wasn't going to cooperate with his desperate need for personal space. "People avoid me because I'm powerful," she said, and now there was something raw in her voice, something that suggested this was confession rather than royal proclamation. "They avoid me because I'm a queen who can shape their futures with a word, because my authority makes them nervous, because proximity to me comes with political implications they'd rather not navigate. Or they don't avoid me at all. They actively seek my attention, court my favor, calculate exactly how association with me might benefit their ambitions or elevate their status." Her ears had drooped slightly, a gesture Tobias had learned indicated sadness or disappointment in Sethran body language. "They want my power. They want my position. They want what I can give them, what I represent, what alliance with me would mean for their political futures. They perform for the crown without ever connecting with the person wearing it." She laughed, but the sound held no humor. "And then you arrive with your elaborate avoidance strategies and your terrible schedule management, and you're trying to protect me from attention you think is unwanted. You're prioritizing my comfort over your own desires. You're treating me like a person who might not appreciate being pursued rather than a political opportunity to be strategically cultivated." She was close enough now that Tobias could smell something like rain and distant flowers, could see the way portable light caught in the fine patterns etched into her ear adornments, could notice that her hands were trembling slightly. "That's possibly the most considerate thing anyone has done in my entire reign," Queen Liarith said quietly. And it's making me reconsider everything I thought I understood about why human archaeologists make terrible schedule decisions. I wasn't trying to be considerate, Tobias admitted, his social filter apparently having given up entirely. I was trying to be professional, and not make an absolute fool of myself by being obviously attracted to someone who's functionally royalty, while I'm just a researcher who talks to dead civilizations because they're easier than living people. You're not just anything, she said firmly. Your work is brilliant. Your theories about Sethka connection philosophy are reshaping how we understand our own cultural origins. Your translation of the ceremonial texts revealed meanings that Sethran scholars missed because we were too close to the material to see it objectively. You're exceptional at what you do. I'm exceptional at ancient inscriptions, Tobias corrected. I'm catastrophically bad at modern social interaction, as demonstrated by the fact that I just confessed to avoiding you for 3 weeks because I find you attractive, which is definitely not how professional collaboration is supposed to work. Queen Liareth smiled then, actually smiled, and the expression transformed her face from regal authority to something warmer, more present, more human despite her distinctly not human features. I think, she said carefully, that perhaps we've both been operating under incorrect assumptions. I assumed your avoidance indicated discomfort with my authority or my species. You assumed your attention would be unwanted. Both of us were wrong. What are you saying? Tobias asked, his heart doing something acrobatic that probably violated several biological principles. I'm saying that I've noticed your absence more than I should, Liareth admitted, her twilight eyes holding his. I'm saying that I found myself disappointed when you weren't at briefings I attended, when your schedule didn't overlap with mine, when opportunities for conversation didn't materialize. I'm saying that I came here tonight specifically to confront you about the avoidance, because not understanding your reasoning was bothering me in ways that felt personal rather than professional. She took a breath, and Tobias realized with dawning wonder that she was nervous too. This ancient queen who'd ruled for 2 centuries was actually nervous talking to him. I'm saying, Liareth continued, that maybe strategic avoidance isn't the solution here. Maybe we could try being honest with each other instead of carefully maintaining professional distance that's making us both uncomfortable for different reasons. That sounds terrifying, Tobias said honestly. It is terrifying, Liareth agreed. But I've been safe and strategic for 200 years, and it's made me powerful but lonely. Maybe terrifying honesty is worth trying. They stood in the ancient ceremonial chamber, surrounded by inscriptions about connection across differences, about choosing present joy over future grief, about the Sethka's belief that genuine connection mattered more than perfect safety. The portable lights cast shadows that danced across 3,000-year-old walls, and Tobias thought that maybe the ancient civilization had understood something important that he was only just beginning to learn. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be around you without constantly censoring myself, without worrying that I'm being inappropriate or too obvious or making you uncomfortable. Then don't censor yourself, Liareth suggested. Be obvious, be inappropriate by professional standards, be genuine instead of strategic. I've had 2 centuries of people performing for me. I'd rather have your awkward honesty. Even when the awkward honesty includes me admitting that I think your ears are beautiful, and I've been trying not to stare at them for 3 weeks. She laughed, genuine and surprised and wonderful, especially then. Though for the record, Sethran ear adornments are designed to be noticed. Staring is culturally appropriate. That would have been useful information 3 weeks ago. Consider yourself informed now. She reached out, hesitant, and touched his hand briefly. Can we start over? Pretend the elaborate avoidance strategy never happened. Try being colleagues who are honest about finding each other's company enjoyable rather than maintaining strategic distance. I'd like that, Tobias said, his voice rough with emotion. Though I'm warning you now, I'm going to be terrible at this. I'll say awkward things. I'll probably stare too much now that I have permission. I'll definitely overthink every interaction, and then panic about whether I'm overthinking correctly. I'll be terrible at it too, Liareth assured him. I'll default to royal formality when I'm nervous. I'll probably over-control situations because that's what I've been trained to do. I'll definitely forget that not every conversation requires political strategy. We're both disasters, Tobias observed. The best kind of disasters, Liareth agreed. Now, show me what you were translating when I interrupted your elaborate solo excavation session that was definitely not scheduled to avoid me. So Tobias did, pulling up his translations on the portable scanner, explaining the ceremonial text about choosing connection despite differences, despite complications, despite every reason that safety might seem more logical than risk. Queen Liareth leaned in to read, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, her twilight eyes scanning the ancient symbols with recognition and understanding. They knew, she said quietly. The Sethka. They understood that different lifespans, different perspectives, different ways of being in the world, none of that mattered as much as choosing connection when it was offered. Your ancestors were wise, Tobias said. Apparently wiser than their descendants who spend 3 weeks avoiding each other instead of just having honest conversations. She smiled at him. We should probably work on that. Definitely, Tobias agreed, starting now. No more strategic avoidance, just terrifying honesty. Deal, Liareth said, and they shook on it in the ancient chamber, surrounded by 3 millennia of accumulated wisdom, beginning the tentative process of actually connecting beyond professional distance and carefully maintained walls. It was terrifying. It was also, Tobias thought, possibly the best decision he'd made since arriving at Deepreach Research Installation. The ancient Sethka would have approved. The shift from strategic avoidance to intentional presence was gradual and occasionally awkward. But Tobias found himself surprisingly willing to endure awkwardness if it meant actually spending time with Queen Liareth without constantly calculating exit strategies. They developed a pattern: morning briefings where his theories met her cultural insights, afternoon excavation work where she joined him in the ruins with genuine enthusiasm that had nothing to do with royal obligation, evening analysis sessions where they reviewed findings over tea that Liareth insisted tasted better when shared. This is terrible, Tobias said during their 3rd evening session, studying the beverage she'd provided. What is this? Sethran traditional blend, Liareth replied, clearly amused by his expression. It's an acquired taste. How long does the acquiring take? Years, decades. Usually about 200 years, she said with completely straight face, then laughed at his horrified expression. I'm joking. It's definitely an acquired taste, but most species manage it within weeks, though humans seem to struggle more than most. Because human taste buds have standards, Tobias muttered, but he kept drinking it anyway because she'd made it specifically for these sessions, and rejecting it felt wrong. They talked about the excavation, but also about themselves. Liareth described growing up Sethran, being identified as potential royal successor at young age, the intensive training in governance and diplomacy and strategic thinking that had consumed her youth. She talked about taking the throne at 73, young by Sethran standards but already decades older than most humans would ever be, and the strange weight of knowing she'd hold that position for centuries, watching generations of her people live and die while she remained essentially unchanged. It's lonely, she admitted one evening, sitting among the catalogued artifacts in the analysis lab. Living for centuries while everyone around you ages normally. You make connections, build friendships, even find people you care deeply about, and then you watch them grow old and die while you're still essentially the same. It makes you cautious about forming attachments, makes you maintain distance because getting close means eventual grief. That sounds exhausting, Tobias said quietly. Constantly holding back because you know the ending before it starts. It is exhausting. It's also been my reality for 200 years, so I've adapted. Gotten good at professional relationships, at connections that matter but don't go too deep, at being present without being vulnerable. She looked at him with those twilight eyes. And then you arrive, being awkward and honest and completely incapable of strategic emotional distance. And suddenly, I'm questioning whether adaptation was actually solution, or just elaborate avoidance strategy. Hey, I'm excellent at avoidance strategy, Tobias protested. You caught me at it 3 weeks ago. You're terrible at avoidance strategy. You think you're being subtle, but you're actually broadcasting your feelings like emergency beacon. She smiled. It's endearing. That's polite way of saying I have no social filter. It's honest way of saying you're genuine in ways that are refreshing after 2 centuries of people who are exceptional at hiding what they actually think and feel. Tobias learned about Sethran culture through Liareth's stories. The emphasis on emotional control and strategic thinking, the value placed on longevity and accumulated wisdom, the complex social hierarchies that governed everything from political negotiations to casual conversations. He learned that ear position was an elaborate communication system, that certain crystals in her adornments indicated family lineage stretching back centuries, that her silver-white hair was relatively rare coloring that had political significance he didn't fully understand. Liareth learned about human culture through his explanations, the chaos of short lifespans that made humans operate with urgency that seemed reckless to longer-lived species, the value placed on innovation and adaptation over tradition, the tendency to form intense connections quickly because time was limited resource not to be wasted. She learned that his awkwardness came from childhood of being different, that his preference for ancient civilizations over modern ones stemmed from finding the past more comprehensible than the present, that his parents had wanted him to be doctor or engineer instead of archaeologist who studied dead languages. They were disappointed, Tobias admitted during one of their evening sessions. Not angry, just disappointed that I chose career that would never make me wealthy or secure or impressive at family gatherings. I think they'd accepted it eventually, but there was definitely period where they kept suggesting I reconsider my life choices. You chose passion over practicality, Liareth observed. That's brave. That's impulsive. Bravery implies I thought it through. I just knew I couldn't spend my life doing something that didn't matter to me, even if it was logical choice. He smiled. Very human approach to decision-making. We're not great at logical when emotions are involved. I think I'm beginning to understand that, Liareth said quietly. 200 years of logical decisions, and I'm only now realizing that maybe emotional decisions have value too. They worked together on the excavation, and the collaboration produced results neither could have achieved alone. Tobias's linguistic expertise combined with Liareth's cultural knowledge created translations that revealed new depths in Sethka philosophy. They published jointly academic papers that became minor sensations for both their archaeological content and their demonstration of effective cross-species research collaboration. The installation's crew stopped speculating about whether they were involved and started simply accepting that Dr. Chen and Queen Liareth were constant presence in each other's orbits. The betting pools evolved from, are they together, to how long before they admit they're together, to eventually just, they're definitely together even if they haven't officially said so. Tobias was mortified when Sarah told him about the betting pool's evolution. Liareth was pragmatic. Let them bet, she said. It's harmless entertainment, and honestly their assessment is probably more accurate than ours. We're both exceptionally good at overthinking things. Are we together? Tobias asked, the question emerging before his brain could stop it. I mean, we spend all our time together. We work together. We have these evening sessions that feel like dates, but we never call them dates. We're clearly more than colleagues, but we've never discussed what more means. I don't want to assume, but I also don't want to not assume if I should be assuming. I'm aware I'm overthinking this. I told you I'd overthink things. Liareth smiled, that expression that made her face warm and present. I think we're whatever we want to be. If you want structure and definitions, we can establish those. If you want to just continue as we are and let it develop naturally, I'm comfortable with that too. What do you want? Honestly, I want to keep doing this. Morning briefings and afternoon excavations and evening tea that tastes terrible but I drink it anyway because you made it. I want to keep learning about you and having you learn about me. I want to stop worrying about whether I'm being appropriate and just be present with you. He took a breath. And I want to acknowledge that I'm attracted to you in ways that go beyond professional admiration, and that I think about you constantly, and that when you smile at me, it does things to my cardiovascular system that are probably medically interesting. That's very thorough confession, Liareth said, her ears tilting forward in what he'd learned was pleasure or interest. Can I offer equally thorough response? Please. I want all of those things too. I want morning briefings where you get excited about inscriptions and use hand gestures that nearly knock over equipment. I want afternoon excavations where you explain theories while sitting in ancient dust like you belong there. I want evening sessions where you drink terrible tea and pretend it's not terrible to be polite. I want you to stop censoring yourself around me because your uncensored reactions are delightful. She moved closer. And I want to acknowledge that I'm attracted to you in ways that terrify me because I've spent 2 centuries avoiding exactly this kind of connection. But apparently you've made me willing to risk terrifying if it means being genuine with someone who sees me as person rather than position. So we're together, Tobias said, officially, in ways that the betting pools can accurately predict. We're together, Liareth confirmed. Which means we should probably discuss practical implications like the fact that I'm functionally immortal while you're human with normal lifespan, which creates timeline complications we should address honestly rather than avoiding. I've thought about that, Tobias admitted. The fact that in 40 or 50 years I'll be elderly and you'll still look like this, that we're building something with expiration date built in. And Liareth asked quietly, and I've decided that I'd rather have decades of genuine connection with you than centuries of careful isolation. Quality over quantity. Being present rather than protecting myself from eventual grief. He met her twilight eyes directly. Very human philosophy, I know, but it's mine and I'm choosing it. Liareth's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's possibly the most human thing you've ever said. I'll take that as compliment. It is compliment. It's also terrifying and brave and making me question 200 years of strategic emotional distance. She reached out, took his hand in hers. If we're doing this, if we're choosing connection despite complications and timeline disparities, and every logical reason that maintaining distance would be safer, then I want to be all in. No holding back because I'm afraid of eventual grief. Just present, genuine, choosing you for however long we get. That sounds perfect, Tobias said, his voice rough with emotion. That sounds terrifying, Liareth corrected. But I'm the best kind of disasters, Liareth agreed, and kissed him in the ceremonial chamber where she'd first confronted him about his terrible avoidance strategy, surrounded by 3,000 years of wisdom about choosing connection over safety. The ancient Sethka would have definitely approved. The excavation progressed through the remaining months with remarkable efficiency, partly due to improved collaboration between human researchers and Sethran cultural experts, mostly due to Tobias and Liareth's combined insights creating synthesis that neither species could achieve alone. They worked in complementary rhythms, his linguistic precision meeting her cultural knowledge, his analytical approach balanced by her intuitive understanding of how ancient philosophy connected to modern practice. The installation crew had long since stopped speculating and started simply accepting. Dr. Chen and Queen Liareth were together in whatever form that took, and it seemed to be working despite every species difference and timeline disparity that should have made it complicated. They were spotted in morning briefings sitting closer than strictly necessary, in afternoon excavations working side by side with comfortable synchronization, in evening sessions that definitely looked like dates, even if they were technically research collaboration. The entire installation knows, Sarah mentioned during one of their linguistic analysis sessions, not looking up from her translation work. Just so you're aware, your relationship is the least secret thing on this station. We weren't trying to keep it secret, Tobias said, which was true. We were just not actively announcing it. You hold hands in the cafeteria. You use pet names in briefings. You literally fell asleep on her shoulder during the council presentation last week. If you're trying for subtle, you're failing spectacularly. I didn't fall asleep. I was resting my eyes. For 15 minutes while she continued presenting, and occasionally patted your head like you were endearing rather than unprofessional. She said I'd been working too hard on the translation project. She's probably right. You're both workaholics who have found each other and enabled mutual workaholic tendencies. Sarah finally looked up. For the record, I'm happy for you. We all are. Even the people who lost money on the betting pools are happy because watching you two together is disgustingly sweet and occasionally hilarious. Why hilarious? Because you're both incredibly intelligent, accomplished professionals who become adorable disasters around each other. Last week, you walked into a wall because you were too busy looking at her. She approved 3 different budget proposals without reading them because you were explaining something with enthusiastic hand gestures. It's like watching competence and mutual infatuation fight for dominance in your brains, and infatuation keeps winning. That's not, Tobias started, then stopped because it was absolutely accurate. We're still getting professional work done. Exceptional professional work, Sarah agreed. Your joint publications are reshaping the field. The translations you're producing together are brilliant. You're just also obviously in love, and everyone can see it except possibly you two, who are busy being in love and not noticing that it's incredibly obvious. Tobias thought about that conversation later, sitting in the ceremonial chamber with Liareth, both of them reviewing the day's findings. They were close enough that their shoulders touched, comfortable in proximity that had become natural over months of choosing presence over distance. Sarah says we're obvious, he mentioned. About being together, apparently the entire installation knows. Of course they know, Liareth replied, not looking up from her data pad. We're not exactly subtle, though I appreciate that you thought we might be. I wasn't trying for subtle, I was trying for professional. You're professionally competent and personally besotted. Both can be true simultaneously. She smiled at him. Does it bother you that people know? No, Tobias admitted. It's just strange. I spent years being invisible on research stations, barely noticed by colleagues, just the quiet guy who studied inscriptions and kept to himself. Now I'm apparently disgustingly sweet and occasionally hilarious, because I walked into a wall while looking at you. You did walk into a wall, Liareth confirmed. It was concerning and adorable in equal measure. I was distracted by your explanation of Sethran succession protocols. You make complicated political structures sound fascinating. Only you would find succession protocols fascinating enough to cause collision with architecture. They worked in comfortable quiet for a while, the kind of silence that came from being comfortable in each other's presence, not needing constant conversation to feel connected. Outside, through the excavation site's atmospheric shields, artificial stars marked the station's position in space, humanity's attempt to make the void feel less empty. I've been thinking about timeline disparities, Liareth said eventually, her voice careful. About the fact that you'll age faster than me, that our time together is limited by human lifespan rather than Sethran longevity. We've discussed this, Tobias reminded her gently. I chose quality over quantity, remember. I remember. I'm choosing it too. But I want you to understand what that means for me, what I'm accepting when I choose you despite knowing how this ends. She set down her data pad, turning to face him fully. In approximately 40 years, give or take, you'll reach the end of typical human lifespan. You'll age, slow down, eventually die. And I'll still be here, looking essentially the same, functionally in my early middle age by Sethran standards. I'll have centuries left while you'll be gone. That's morbid but accurate, Tobias agreed. I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm trying to be honest about what I'm choosing. Her twilight eyes were serious. I'm choosing decades with you knowing they end in grief. I'm choosing present connection over future safety. I'm choosing to love you despite certain eventual loss. And I want you to know that I'm making that choice consciously, deliberately, with full understanding of the cost. Love, Tobias repeated, his heart doing acrobatics. You said love. I did, Liareth confirmed. Because that's accurate. I love you, Tobias Chen. Your awkwardness and your enthusiasm and your ability to make ancient inscriptions sound like the most exciting things in the universe. I love how you drink terrible tea to be polite and walk into walls when you're distracted and fall asleep during presentations because you work too hard. I love being around you, working with you, choosing you every day. I love you too, Tobias said, the words feeling inadequate and perfect simultaneously. Your brilliance and your vulnerability, and the way you make 200 years of experience seem like gift rather than burden. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes and tolerate my social disasters and choose genuine connection despite every logical reason that distance would be safer. I love you, Liareth. Present tense, active choice, every day. They kissed in the ceremonial chamber, surrounded by inscriptions about choosing connection despite complications. And Tobias thought that the ancient Sethka had understood something profound about the value of present joy over future grief. The excavation reached its conclusion 6 months later, the site fully documented and preserved, ready to teach future generations about the civilization that had vanished mysteriously but left wisdom in stone. The final ceremonial chamber revealed inscriptions that perfectly summarized everything Tobias and Liareth had learned, not just about the Sethka, but about choosing connection despite differences, complications, inevitable endings. They stood together in that final chamber, reading translations that felt personally relevant. Choose presence over safety, Tobias read aloud. Choose connection despite certain grief. Choose love that ends over isolation that endures. The Sethka understood that temporary joy with meaning is more valuable than permanent safety without connection. They were right, Liareth said quietly. They figured out something that took me 200 years to learn. Something you taught me by being genuine when I expected strategic distance. You taught me too, Tobias replied. That connection is worth risk. That being vulnerable is brave rather than weak. That decades of genuine relationship with you is better than lifetime of careful isolation. The excavation closed officially with ceremony attended by both human and Sethran dignitaries, academic presentations about findings and their significance, awards and recognition for the research, team's contributions to xenoarchaeological understanding. Tobias and Liareth presented jointly, their collaboration obvious and effective, their relationship equally obvious to anyone paying attention. Earth's Xenoarchaeology Council sent formal congratulations mixed with requests for future collaboration proposals. The Sethran Dominion acknowledged the successful excavation and the deepening cultural understanding between species. Both governments carefully avoided commenting on their lead researcher's personal relationship, which everyone agreed was diplomatic wisdom. 1 year after that confrontation in the ceremonial chamber, Tobias woke up in quarters that had become shared space, in bed next to a woman who'd ruled for 2 centuries and chosen to be vulnerable with awkward human archaeologists who tried to avoid her for 3 weeks. Morning, he said. Morning. Liareth was already awake, reading on her data pad, that familiar habit of starting days with information. Happy anniversary of me confronting you about your terrible avoidance strategy. Best confrontation of my life, Tobias said. Really changed my perspective on strategic distance. Mine too. She set down her pad. I've been offered another excavation project. Different sector, different ruins, approximately 3 years of work. They want you to lead the linguistic analysis. Are you going? Tobias asked. Only if you're going, Liarith replied. I'm done making decisions that prioritize politics over personal connection. If you want to take the project, I'll accept. If you want to do something else, we'll find different opportunities. What do you want? I want to keep doing this, Tobias said simply. Excavating ancient civilizations with you, learning about cultures that understood connection better than we do, being together for however long we get. The location doesn't matter as much as the company. Then we're going, Liarith decided. 3 more years of digging through ruins and terrible tea, and you walking into walls because you're too busy looking at me. I've gotten better about the wall thing. You walked into a door frame yesterday. That was structural ambiguity. The frame was poorly marked. She laughed, that sound he'd become addicted to hearing, and kissed him in the morning light filtering through their quarters. They'd chosen each other despite complications, despite timeline disparities, despite every logical argument for safety over risk. They'd chosen decades of genuine connection over centuries of careful isolation. They'd chosen presence over distance, honesty over strategy, love that would end over protection from grief. The ancient Sethka would have been proud. Tobias and Liarith were both choosing to be proud too, choosing each other, choosing connection, choosing temporary joy with meaning over permanent safety without love. And in 3,000 years, maybe someone would excavate their story and learn the same lessons about choosing connection despite complications, about being brave enough to be vulnerable, about the value of genuine relationship over strategic distance. The Sethka's wisdom lived on, not just in stone inscriptions, but in 2 people who'd learned to excavate each other's hearts as carefully as they excavated ancient ruins, slowly, deliberately, with respect for what they might find and courage to keep digging despite uncertainty. It was, Tobias thought, possibly the most important discovery he'd ever made.